When designing a rule set for a rules-light system, how would you balance the simplicity of the rules with keeping things interesting?
That is a great question, and it is part of the tension between crunchier systems and simpler systems. Simpler systems are easier to grasp, quicker to play, there's less referencing of rules and so on, but they can be unsatisfying mechanically. Like something like Fate is a very low fidelity system. There's not a lot of fine gradation between being really good at something and not being really good at something as a character. Other simplistic games, relatively simplistic system games like Storyteller, you've got a range from 1 to 10, or 1 to 5 for a stat or a skill. Then maybe you tack something onto that, like specialities, that sort of thing. That can add a bit of depth, but then it's also adding complication, which takes away from the central conceit of the system, that being that it's simple, right? And the crunchy systems can be much more satisfying mechanically. You can model reality better, you can have fine gradations of skill or bonuses or technology or whatever else, and that can be deeply involving to a certain type of player. If we look back to 3rd edition D&D, the interplay of race, class, prestige class, and special capabilities, feats. That's the word I was struggling to remember. That created a whole subculture of broken builds on Reddit and so on. So people have fun playing with the complexity of the system. Traveller New Era had Fire, Fusion and Steel, which was a whole system for making up any kind of technology that you could ever want, which was horrendously complicated but also deeply involving, even though the system wasn't a high granularity system at the end, so all those calculations didn't result in much difference at the end of the day. So the real problem is that even if you start with a very simple system, if you start adding complications to keep it interesting to people who are more mechanically involved, then you can't help but take away from what makes the system interesting in the first place and accessible in the first place, its simplicity. I think the worst example of this is probably Tri-Stat. On the face of it, very, very simple. You've got 3 statistics, maybe a few skills, right? But then it's hideously overcomplicated with all manner of exceptions, different costs for different skills depending on the genre that you're playing, all of that kind of thing. And every single decision along that line takes away from that original simplicity, to the point where what markets itself on its simplicity becomes a nearly unplayably complex system. So like anything, it's a balance, I think. But the more system intense games lend themselves better to certain kinds of player and to campaign play, where small gradations and improvements can occur over a very long time, but players can sustain that feeling that their characters are improving, that they're going somewhere, that they can get better over the course of a campaign or compensate for their weaknesses. Whereas in a rules light game, you tend to be more stuck with the character as is, because any progress is a big deal.